Tēnā koutou katoa and welcome to Sector Report as we investigate the dry weather which has recently hit many parts of the country. Is it too early to be using the D word, drought? I pay a visit to Northland where there are fears of another big dry and speak with the woman who heads up the Northland Rural Support Trust, Julie Yonker. I also meet a farmer on Northland's east coast and look at the impact the dry weather's already having on his district. And we discover a clever young dairy farmer and his new water-saving invention. I also get the latest insight into what farmers can expect in the coming months with NIWA climate scientist Georgina Griffiths. But first, Julie Yonker of the Northland Rural Support Trust. Well, Julie, welcome back to the Sector Report program. We in fact talked to you last summer when we had this drought up here. Now, tell me, what sort of feedback about moisture levels are you getting from around Northland?
We're getting that the soil moisture deficit is really low, a lot lower this time this year than it was last year, which is a major concern, considering that come January we had a fairly severe drought.
What are the rainfall figures showing you from around the region? It must be much less than normal for this time of year.
We've had a lot less rainfall than we would expect, and a lot less rainfall than we would have liked, considering that we were so much in deficit from the drought.
Is the Rural Support Trust actually telling farmers to take precautions against drought yet, or at least think about taking precautions?
We are trying to explain to them that it's better to act now and have that leeway up your sleeve than to really get into a situation where we're having to be on the back foot.
I guess it's hard to know when to start acting. You don't want to be too early, but you don't want to be too late.
No, that's right. You walk a really fine line between scaremongering and wanting to give people the best advice available.
Now, the Rural Support Trust for Northland had a conference call this morning. So what was being said at that call?
Basically just reconfirming that we are concerned that in the region the farmers themselves are feeding a lot more supplements than they would at this time of the year, that the rainfall prediction is no significant rain in the next 10 days, perhaps showers. The kumara growers are particularly concerned they need the rain to get their crops growing. They're a major financial sector for the Dargaville region.
Well, we're in a La Nina weather pattern, which generally tends to mean more wet weather over the summer. So are you surprised that in fact it has been so dry in this La Nina weather pattern?
Well, it is a little bit of an unpleasant surprise. We were all quite buoyed by the fact that they'd said it was going to be a La Nina. The only caution was that La Ninas are a little bit more unpredictable than El Nino, in the fact that you get much more variability as to where the moisture comes and when it comes particularly.
So would you advise dairy farmers in particular to make sure they've stockpiled plenty of supplementary feed?
Well, Dairy NZ have been very careful with their messages to say use up your available feed cover now, don't graze it too hard. If you need supplements, start supplementing, taking your cows off the pasture so they don't graze it too low.
And I guess the degree of dryness tends to vary around the region, does it? It's rather a patchwork. The
Dargaville region, which fed later last year, has actually been hit very early this year. South and coastal Dargaville is particularly badly affected. Yet there are places further inland which have still got moisture, but still not on the size that we would like it to be. It's very patchy. That last amount of rain we had, some people had 25, 35 mils, another 4.
Is the problem just a lack of rainfall, or do spring winds contribute to this drying out?
Well, with the last amount of rain, we had 20 mils here, but it was followed the next day by a howling southwester, which would have sucked any moisture out of the soil.
Of course, you had a drought last summer. In fact, we filmed its effects on your dairy farm then. I guess many are still recovering from that. What were the downstream effects on farmers, despite the rains coming later?
I think the largest downstream effect has been the inability of a lot of farmers to actually get their overdraft facilities down enough so that they can be set up to cope with another drought, and that's, I think, what we're particularly concerned about this time.
So another drought would hit farmers hard who are still recovering from last summer's big dry.
Oh gosh, yes, it would. We knew that it would kick over a lot quicker this time because we knew that the soil moisture deficit was really low, which is why we want to We're having a meeting tomorrow to actually really assess where we want to move on the situation, because we don't want to be caught, taking it too late.
Is it hard to get the message out to all farmers who need to know what precautions to take?
Well, not all of them. A lot of farmers are really proactive, but it's quite difficult to get. It's difficult to get to the difficult to reach farmers. Ones that aren't perhaps engaged in farm discussion groups, ones that don't belong to the different sector groups, the ones that tend to try it on their own and often find then that they're suddenly caught short.
So what is, at a practical level, the Rural Support Trust able to do for those who are hit by this big dry?
The main thing we can do is offer personal support. We offer a really good facility with ag facilitators who are able to go and give people the options so that they are able to make a decision and know that they're not alone.
So a lot of it's about advice?
A lot of it's not so much advice, but pointing them in the right direction to where they can get this advice.
Now, if it is dry in October and November, and we're now going into December, what is the effect on pasture?
The worst effect is the pasture growth rate. The pasture growth rates throughout Northland have dropped quite dramatically. We would be seeing a lot of cropping being made. All the contractors are noticing a huge drop, which has an economic effect for them. These are just even your standard cropping for silage and baleage, turnips, maize. People who got them in early have got some growing, but a lot of farmers who are low input farmers who like to make haylage and supplements from their own farms are finding that has been a particularly difficult thing to do, and the impact that has is if they have to feed it out over the summer, they won't have this feed available for the winter, and that's where we run into problems.
What sort of economic impact did last summer's drought have on the agricultural economy here in Northland?
I haven't got the full figures to date, but I know they were in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Right. That's quite a cost, isn't it?
It's a huge cost, and the fact that the farmers haven't recovered enough to be able to go out and spend will also have a huge effect on the economy for Northland. Agriculture is the largest sector in Northland, providing money into the region.
So to sum up, Julie, how concerned are you that Northland could be heading for a full-on drought?
I would say extremely concerned. We try not to panic, obviously, but we are extremely concerned. Looking at the weather outside and looking at the situation, there is reason to be concerned.
Well, thank you very much for your time today, Julie, and let's just pray for rain.
Thank you, John.
Julie Yonker there, head of Northland's Rural Support Trust. I'll be back in a moment with a close-up look at the effects the dry weather's already having up north. And I take a look at a milking shed invention which its young developer says will save farmers thousands of litres of water. Much of Northland looks lush enough, but take a closer look at many paddocks and appearances can deceive. Weather experts call it a green drought. And look at the late November, early December sky. There's cloud, but no rain. Bruce Patton farms around 2,000 cows on 6 different properties totalling 900 hectares in the Ruakaka area just south of Whangarei.
Well, this farm looks pretty good compared with most of the north, but we've had since January this year, we've had 578 mils on this property, which is less than half of what we normally get. Really? And the effects it'll turn very quickly from here. Even on this place, and we have seen that on the other farms, where there's more sandy, more freer draining soil, that's turned very quickly to being very dry. So people are quite concerned, yeah.
So what sort of precautions can people take?
Well, they're making sure they've got enough supplement to get through the summer, and so there's a lot of extra crops gone in. So they're thinking about along those lines. But one of the problems with the crops is that they're only good if they come up, and so the turnip crops are looking awful around the place. So they've tried to cover themselves with a summer crop, but without moisture that's a bit limiting. There's been a lot more silage made around the place, and some forced surpluses just to make sure that they've got some going forward. looking very carefully at the stocking rates. The stocking rates have come back in general, right across the board, so you know they're carrying less stock through the summer as well. And I suppose the other thing that they've really been mindful of is water supplies, and a lot of people, ourselves included, have upgraded the water supplies from last year so that we can cope with it.
So when does Northland need the heavens to open by to avoid a repeat of last season's drought, which only broke in May?
Probably a nice wet Christmas day would be very nice, actually. Yeah, I relate it back to another season where we were very dry early on, very similar to this, and we got good rain in January, and that gave us a good, and then it kept raining from there on. It was okay. We were able to cope with that. We had autumn cows that we were able to dry off, so it enabled us to get through a bit easier than most. So I suppose late January, late December, January. You know, but if we don't get rain then you know it's going to be an early season for most.
Does the lack of rain, say into January, actually make it harder for the pasture to recover when the rains finally do come?
Well, this will be interesting to see how the pasture copes this year with 2 dries like that in a row, and we're already seeing some of the pastures thinning out a lot earlier than this time last year, and so the new pasture, just putting it under a real test like this, will be interesting to see how it persists. Yeah, so that is a concern, yep, that we will actually have to do. We did a lot of undersowing last year to replace lost pasture, and chances are if it stays dry we'll have to do a lot more.
Northland's not like Canterbury, it's not irrigation country, but Bruce Patton's got backup for the dry times with manually operated stationary irrigators. In fact, Bruce's turnip crop gives a good indication that things have got much drier than normal for spring, and he's having to put a second irrigator at the top of the paddock to salvage what he can of the crop.
After we planted, because it was dry, then we actually ran our effluent irrigator over some of the paddock. And where we ran the irrigator over is where the seed came up, and where there's no seed or no plants, the irrigator didn't get to. So what we're doing now is we've got a stationary irrigator that we're actually moving around the whole paddock, which is very manual, hard work, but that's what we'll have to do to sort of make it come to anything. And a lot of people have got similar results to this. We've actually used cross slot and help conserve as much moisture as we can in the ground. A lot of people just use the traditional methods of hoeing and dripping up the ground, and they've lost all that moisture, and so there's absolutely nothing coming up in those situations.
So at least you were able to put the seed directly into undisturbed.
That's right, yeah, where there's a bit of moisture.